Lemon Techno.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this week's Top 3 Hacker News articles. We're going to start this series by covering the top 3, but in the future, I want to try to extend this a bit more to cover 5, 6, maybe even 7 articles. The idea is briefly going over what was said in the article and some of the comments. Hopefully, this will give you a brief recap of what happened this week in tech. The first article is Python 3.13 gets a just-in-time compiler by Anthony Shaw. It starts off by mentioning that Brant Butcher submitted a pull request to Python 3.13 adding a just-in-time compiler. Basically, it's a compiler that emits machine code, in contrast to an ahead-of-time compiler, which generates the machine code once and then you can just execute this afterwards. The article itself gives a few examples of Python, bytecode, and the resulting just-in-time changes. This resulting code does the same thing, but runs faster. It furthermore mentions that it used the copy and patch approach for this implementation. The article states that the big downside with a full just-in-time compiler is that the process of compiling once into intermediate language and then into machine code is slow. The copy and patch approach was selected because the compilation from bytecodes to machine code is done as a set of templates that are then stitched together. We can see that this implementation has a 2 to 9% performance improvement, and while it initially doesn't seem to be that much, it does open the doors to some huge optimizations going forward. The first comment attributes copy and patch to Harang Xu and Fredrik Kjolstad, and it mentions a few papers and implementations. Overall, I'd give the article a 9. It is a great work by the implementers, and the article includes lots of very practical and interesting examples. The second article is by Mr. Bruh, and it is how he pwned half of America's fast food chains simultaneously. The article explains a bit about what Chatter AI is, how they found it basically by scanning a bunch of .ai websites, and they found the vulnerability in Firebase. It explains what was breached, including names, phone numbers, emails, passwords, etc., and also including how they actually managed to gain full access to the admin dashboard. Fortunately, the vulnerability has already been patched. One of the biggest things that came out when I was reading the article was basically the question of what the intentions were, and you can actually see this in the comments with the first one mentioning, is this just a pen test, is this a guerrilla or a good Samaritan, etc., right? And you can see this instilled a whole bunch of arguments about this, and it got really intense. You can see by the length of the thread and basically all the replies underneath that, it got pretty hectic. I'd give the article a 6 based on the information that it contains, yet I subtracted a few points due to the wording. Article number 3 is by Matthew Duggan, and it is quite a long article, but it's one of those that dives into a lot of stories from the past, including images and whatnot, and it's super interesting. If you have the time, I would really recommend you give this one a read. The article starts off by talking about Apple Care Dispatch and how back in 2008, if you owned a desktop Mac and lived in a certain place, when you contacted Apple Care to get warranty support, they would send someone like the author out with a part and basically to make the necessary replacement or repairs on site. And this reminds me a lot of Dell. Back in 2007 and 2008, I remember calling them a few times and always someone would turn up a few days later with the parts and make the repairs for you. Just absolutely stellar service. The article then goes into some of the tools that were used, some of the processes. Here it mentions, remember back when Macs were something you could fix? Crazy times. Then it delves into some of the target market or the people that were actually addressed, right? The people that they would visit, some of the, these studios, the rich doctors, a lot of, wealthy neighborhoods and the richest people in Chicago, basically, who, when you would turn up, you would do the repair real quick. Then they would give you a bunch of random technical tasks, fixing, the printer setup, routers, stuff like that. In the comments, we can see another person that was also doing the same thing in the mid-90s. I'd like to give this article an 8.5 because it was an absolutely stellar article. And as this week's honorary mention, we have this article of Google cuts jobs in engineering and other divisions, which is quite a grim announcement. Part of it mentions that some of the people affected were engineers that were working on the Pixel line of phones. The first comment mentions how Google makes them kind of sad that they used to be so cool pushing technology forward. I'll give the article a 6 as the news is a bit grim, and I hope everyone affected manages to find a new position sooner than later. Additionally, I really hate the New York Times paywall, so yeah, that's gonna deduct a few points. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this week's edition of Hacker News Top 3, and hopefully we'll be back next week on Friday with another list of interesting articles and a few comments that were discussed. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one.